it's 9 a.m. so we could start, but before we get started, can we just make sure that, is Mr. Worley on the phone then?
Yes, Mr. Worley's on.
Okay,
Ms. Lee is on.
and Ms. Lee is on also. Okay. Well, good morning. It's 9 a.m., so I'll
The
call.
broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Excellent. I guess the webinar lady will be our boss today. Anyway, it's 9 a.m. and we'll begin, and I'll call the meeting to order, and I'll start off. Matt, since you're here, do you want to do the invocation?
Be glad to. Heavenly Father, we worship and praise your holy name. You're the author of righteousness and truth and justice. And we ask you today for wisdom and courage so that Georgia might live up to the words of wisdom, justice, and moderation. And we ask that all things done today be viewed glorious in your sight. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. We all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Okay, if we could just do an official roll call. Mr. Worley, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Ms. Lee?
Ms. Lee, you're self-muted right now.
Ms. Lee?
I'm here.
Great,
Yes, I'm
great.
present. Yep.
And Mr. Mashburn's here, and myself. We have a quorum. Okay. Item number 2 on the agenda is the approval of the board minute meetings from August 27th, 2020. Members of the board, you've had that before you to review. Now would be the appropriate time for a motion.
This is Mr. Worley. I make a motion that we approve the meeting minutes of the August 27th meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Worley. Do we have a second? Do we have a second?
This is Matt Mashburn, I second.
We have a second. Do we have any comments about the meeting minutes? Any additions, changes that anyone would wish to make? Hearing none, all those in favor of the minutes as presented, please do so by signifying aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Okay. Now move on to the third point in the agenda, public comments. And I believe our webinar host will be managing that process. How many folks do we have signed up for comments?
So far, it's about 10 people so far.
10 folks. We allow 2 minutes each, and we'll go ahead and handle that right now. So who is the first person we have?
First, we have Liz Troop.
Okay, Ms. Troop, good morning.
You're self-muted right now.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm Liz Troop, and I live in DeKalb County. The first duty of the State Election Board is to supervise and coordinate the Office of the Secretary of State and others to obtain uniformity in practices and proceedings and legality and purity in all primaries and elections. The fifth duty of this board is to investigate the administration of elections and to report violations to the Attorney General or appropriate DA for further investigation and prosecution. No investigation into Fulton County's role in the June 9th absentee ballot delays can be meaningful without this board's thorough review of the role of the Secretary of State. Why did the Secretary of State tell 6.9 million voters to go ahead and send emails with image attachments to to counties without first establishing dedicated email addresses and servers to handle the traffic? Did Secretary Raffensperger even ask counties if this was going to work? Small counties, especially those with sparse internet availability, might not have had troubles. But Fulton has over 800,000 registered voters. What email account do you use that can handle that kind of traffic? While Fulton's actions warrant criticism, your actions will be a sham unless you take an honest look at all the relevant parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next, we have William Brown.
Mr. Brown?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I didn't understand the instructions last week, so I was planning on speaking then, but here I am now. My name is William Brown. I live in Sandy Springs, Fulton County, and I have three parts of my comments. One is my obtaining and submitting an absentee ballot for the June 9th primary. My wife and I mailed the absentee ballot requests on April 10th. She received hers on April 27th, and eventually her vote was received by the county on May 22nd. Mine never arrived, and 11 exchanges with 5 different people, Secretary of State's office, Fulton County, and my representative in the Georgia Senate. Eventually, I received a ballot May 26th. I put it in the Dropbox May 28th. Next, I tried to learn what happened to my ballot. I made status requests starting June 5th June 5th through July 20th, 14 exchanges, 8 people, Secretary of State, Fulton County, and the Georgia Assembly rep. 7/20, July 20th, I filed an open records request. My GA representative said my vote had not counted. I learned that from him on August 5th. I emailed the ORR administration on August 17th because I had no response despite the law requiring a 3-day response. I received ORR administration email on August 19th saying it appears Fulton County never received my ballot. So I'd like to ask, how do I find out where my ballot is? I put it in the Dropbox, and according to the Secretary of State's ORR administration, it never was received by Fulton County. That's the end of my comment. I want to find out how to know what happened to my ballot, and I think that will help everyone in case the same thing happened to them.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Our next speaker?
Next, we have Patty Nathan.
Ms. Nathan?
You're self-muted right now.
Good morning. I'm Patty Nathan from Sandy Springs, Fulton County. Rather than expending our limited state and county resources on investigating Fulton County, you should be resolving all the technical issues and breakdowns across the state. Problems so significant that they require at least 20 counties to extend their voting hours. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Next, we have Rhonda Martin.
Ms. Martin?
You're self-muted right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Rhonda Martin. I'm a Fulton County voter and a board member of the Coalition for Good Governance. At a recent Fulton County Board and Registration and Election meeting, I presented my Christmas and November wish list. I'd like to share it with you now. First gift I want for me and all Georgia voters is an efficient portal to use to request an absentee ballot. Thank you for already granting this wish. I found the new portal very easy to use, and my voter page shows that my application was received and my ballot will be issued on September 18th. Second, I want drop boxes distributed throughout the state in obvious and convenient locations. With all of the concerns about the USPS, drop boxes are going to be more important than ever. Unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion about drop boxes. When discussing concerns about this recently with friends, many seem to think that drop boxes were available at their polling places. It only makes sense, right? This underscores the importance of accepting absentee ballots in the usual places that people go to vote. They don't want to stand in line. They have done their homework. Let's let them turn it in and get the credit in the easiest possible way. The third gift I want is for the scanners to be configured to reliably count every vote that a human would count. Technology should support our efforts, not subvert them. And during adjudication, vote review panels should be encouraged to consult the original paper ballots whenever the ballot images seem unusual. For instance, when it appears that a voter has cast an entirely blank ballot. What's that about? Vote review panels should feel comfortable investigating these issues. Finally, when ballots are being hand duplicated, I want the election laws and rules of Georgia to be followed. I want duplicate ballots to be marked as such and labeled so that the originals can be referenced when conducting audits. I hope you all are feeling generous and will do all you can to make my dreams for this next election come true. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person,
Next, we have Laura Walker.
Ms. Walker.
You're self-muted right now. Next, we have Laura Walker. You're self-muted right now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Walker, and I'm from Columbus in Muskogee County. And I just wanted to volunteer to be a witness or someone that you question when you investigate all of the counties that had issues in the June primary. Muskogee County had probably about 10 of our precincts had early morning problems getting set up and delays because of deliveries of machines. And we had lines all day at about 5 of our precincts. Our voting time was extended from all of our precincts until 9 p.m. And we had line warmers out at one of our precincts who were not able to finish voting until 10 p.m. that night. So I'm sure you're not singling out Fulton County for any reason. I look forward to giving you my testimony or assistance when you come to check out all of the counties that had issues because of lack of thoughtful and realistic procedures for the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. Ms. Frances Watson, who heads up our investigation division, will have an investigator reach out to you. Thank you. Our next speaker.
Next, we have George Balbona. You're self-muted right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi, it's George Balbona. I'm from Cobb County. Took a little field trip yesterday to go down to Chatham County, Savannah, to observe the hand recount for the State House District 163 election, runoff, which was decided by 20 votes, razor thin, for the hand recount. I had a quick question. Clearly, let me say hand recount one more time. Why was there a Dominion voting systems representative present all day for a hand recount? What purpose could he possibly serve? This is looking at paper, and that's not really their forte. So on top of being there all day, in a rather Three Stooges kind of way, whenever I tried to look at his name on his credentials, he would flip it over or cross his hands over it. This is not transparency. He would not let me see his name. We played this game all day. Why? On top of that, Russell Bridges and Thomas Mahoney, that's the election supervisor and the chairperson of the Board of Elections, intimidated and threatened at least 3 people, including myself, who were observers, with removal, unlawful removal. On top of that, I was made aware that Russell Bridges, the election supervisor for Chatham County, doesn't provide responsive information when somebody submits an open records request. That is utterly unacceptable. I think he should be told by the Secretary of State about OCGA 50-18-70. This isn't optional. You can't choose to not follow Georgia election code, okay? Or any part of OCGA, really. This cherry picking is getting ridiculous. I just submitted 2 open records requests this morning, one to Chatham County Board of Elections and one to the Secretary of State. I hope I will receive my responsive initial response in 3 business days, and the cost.
Thank you.
Anyway,
Next speaker?
Next, we have Aklima Kandakar.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for convening this meeting, and thank you to everybody and your wonderful comments. I just want to say that I echo a lot of the sentiments that I heard from William Brown, from Patty Nathan, from Rhonda Martin, from Laura Walker, from other speakers today. And if anyone wants to get in touch to talk about these issues, to work together, and with the Secretary of State's office, my name is Aklima Kandokar. My email address is aklima@allvotingislocal.org. I am the Georgia State Director at All Voting is Local. We are a campaign housed at the Leadership Conference, and we are dedicated to promoting and protecting voting rights. Now, Fulton County's processing issues were apparent because it is one of our most populous counties, not because other counties did not experience issues. Fulton's volume of applications and ballots outpaced other counties, so it makes sense that similar complaints were not widely publicized. But as Mr. Worley noted at the last meeting, one person denied their vote is too many, and we must work together to ensure that no voter is ever disenfranchised. We, along with other voting rights groups, have recommended that the Secretary of State's office provide clear mandates and uniformity for all counties to follow, not just suggestions, so that processing delays due to an influx of absentee ballots do not jeopardize votes. Specifically, applications must be issued immediately and not held for indiscriminate processing times. The MVP site must also be updated immediately with when application and ballots are received and processed. Absentee ballots must be sent to voters immediately, with enough time for voters to cure any issue, and more staff is necessary to ensure that all counties can process applications and ballots correctly ahead of time. Your office must provide mandatory direction to county offices so that our voters are not disenfranchised in November. Investigating individual counties is not enough. We are open to working with the Secretary of State's office, to communicating with voters, and helping the process along. Please connect with us. Again, my name is Aklima Kandokar. My email address is aklima@allvotingislocal.org. We are connected with other table partners in doing this work. Please connect with us. We are happy to work together to make sure that our elections work more efficiently and effectively for all of our voters. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker?
Next, we have Dawn Genety. You're self-muted right now.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for the meeting and allowing us to speak. My name is Dawn Genety. I'm from Fayette County. I am a proud voter and very happy that we are all on the same page. We all want to have equitable elections. However, what we saw, the lines that we saw, the suffering that we saw in order for people to be able to vote in the last several elections is an embarrassment as a Georgian. I'm sure we all feel embarrassed, and that's why we're all here, and we want to work hard for the next election. And it's this board's responsibility to make sure that that happens throughout all of Georgia. We should be investigating any long lines that occurred in the last elections and ensure that that doesn't happen going forward. Every person's right is to be able to vote. All the speakers have made wonderful points. I especially want the gentleman who had wasn't able to vote or his vote wasn't counted. How can, when you have that, we all need to know why that happened. a vote was cast, it was presented, and it wasn't counted. The precinct, we've heard that there are precincts that are being changed and maybe larger precinct areas. I want to know that how are the votes being notified of the change in their precinct? Wonderful that there's a large facility in downtown Atlanta that will house the precinct.
Thank you, Ms. Genevieve.
Thank you. Next speaker?
Next, we have Paula Bosworth. You're self-muted right now. Yeah, you're unmuted, so you can speak now.
Okay. Next person? I think that's the 10th speaker. Is there one more? That's it? That's everyone? Okay, great. Thank you for your public comments today. Before we get started into the investigation report, also, I usually like to allow our board members to make any opening comments that they might have. Mr. Worley or Ms. Lee, would you have any opening comments you'd like to share with the committee and the public before we get started on the investigation report?
This is Mr. Worley. I do have an issue that I want to make a statement on. Earlier this week, Judge Ross in U.S. District Court issued a ruling allowing counties to count absentee ballots that are returned within 3 days after the election, as long as they were postmarked on Election Day. I've had the opportunity to read Judge Ross's ruling. It's carefully thought out. It's a very reasoned decision. I think it sets a standard that is consistent with how we treat military ballots, and I think it's the right thing to do. There were a number of claims that were brought in the case that Judge Ross dismissed, but she did rule on behalf of the plaintiffs on that one issue, and I think she did so correctly. I was disappointed to read in the paper that the Secretary of State planned to appeal Judge Ross's decision. I don't think that's good for, I don't think it's good for the state. I also don't think it's good for the voters. I think an appeal or the prospect of an appeal will only lead to more confusion. I think it's important that we have a consistent rule right now that is understood by all the counties. Number one, I would urge the Secretary of State not to appeal Judge Ross's decision. Let's respect it, deal with it, and move on. Second, I intend to inform the Attorney General and our outside counsel in the case that I have no wish to appeal that decision as a party in the case, and to instruct them not to file an appeal on my behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other board members that wish to speak? Mr. Mashburn?
I'm going to take my mask off just to make my transmission more clear. I also read Judge Ross's opinion, and I appreciate my colleague David's comments. I think, as usual, his comments are well thought out and well spoken. I just happen to disagree with the conclusion that he has drawn, in that military ballots have a special place, in that we have heroes out on the front lines defending the country in harm's way, and so a little bit of extra accommodation in that regard doesn't bother me. The thing that I am concerned about, and David and I and the rest of the board and the Secretary of State and the staff of the Secretary of State and the counties have been working so hard to respond to COVID. And in fact, we've drawn, some report had us number one in the nation for responding to COVID in the steps that we've taken. So the board has been proactive, the Secretary of State has been very proactive, staff has been very proactive, and we worked very, very hard to set up a carefully balanced system. And one of the precepts that I've always followed is that votes should not be cast after the polls have closed. And the judge's order, by allowing votes to be counted, as long as they're postmarked by midnight, I fear is going to create a problem with campaign staffs who have now heard the results of the election going to those voters who have absentee ballots that haven't been cast. And I fear, my fear, and one of the fears that as we've carefully crafted this system through months and months and months of hard work, has been that we don't want to increase the likelihood or the incentive for ballot harvesting or voter intimidation. And I fear that in the 5 hours after the polls close and the midnight, that this order opens up the citizens of Georgia to intimidation. It opens up to ballots being cast after the polls have closed that will be counted. And therefore, I would instruct, please, the Secretary of State's office to immediately appeal, and if they need one of the parties to authorize it, I authorize the immediate appeal. And I hope, while the majority of that opinion I thought was well-reasoned and well thought out, I hope this portion of the opinion will be reversed on appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mashburn. Do any other members have any opening comments on any issues that you'd like to discuss before we get into the investigation report?
This is Onley, and I would just echo some of Mr. Mashburn's thoughts. I definitely appreciate Mr. Worley's thoughts, but I don't think that UOCAVA voters and local voters, in-state voters, if you will, could be completely, I guess, on equal grounds in terms of availability and resources. For one, we're making special rules for local voters or in-state voters, such as drop-off boxes and other accommodations that UOCAVA voters do not have access to. There's also voters overseas with timing considerations, dates, with how fast and how soon the ballots can get to us here in the state, and sometimes they're a day behind, day ahead. So it can't be completely in parallel, and those rules are made, or the laws for the 3 days extra for UOCAVA are to accommodate those differences. And given the resources that we're doing and making available to in-state voters, I don't think it's completely correct to make one completely in sync with the other, given the different accommodations that they need. And I think for that reason, I would lean towards Mr. Mashburn's thoughts on this one, and although I very much appreciate Mr. Worley's thoughts as well.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. I will say, we always want to make sure that for our military voters that we reach out to them. If you think about their dedication, their sacrifice, we always want to make sure that they've gone above and beyond the call of duty, because when they do enter military service, in effect, what many of them don't realize at the time, particularly if they're 18, is that they've written a blank check, and sometimes that check gets cashed. They pay the ultimate price with their life. So the very least we can do is extend that 3 days for our military overseas stationed folks. And also, if we think about things that we've done in the past, like the GI Bill, that my father had the advantage of taking advantage of after he fought in World War II. So we've always done these things, and I think it's a wonderful thing about our nation. And so I appreciate the comments of Ms. Lee, that strong distinction between the sacrifice that our military folks make for our nation, and so we're very grateful for that. With our investigation report, Ms. Watson, I'm going to turn that over to you with the new case, and then you might have some other speakers, and I'll let you introduce them. But if you want to present SCB case 2020-027, the floor is yours. Sorry. Is that good?
Yes, that's better. Yes, at first I would like to have the Elections Director, Chris Harvey, to say a few words before I present.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Just want to say a few words before this presentation of this case. I don't feel like I need to rehash the comments I made last week regarding the COVID-19 situation and the response. I just want to remind the board members that those same circumstances that were in effect then apply to this case too. Some of the different issues. I also want to say just a word or two about timing in response to some of the public comments and things that have been said. The idea that this is some type of persecution against Fulton County, I disagree with that characterization. I think in many callers and people have said Fulton County was not the only county with problems and with violations, and that's correct. And there are investigations in several, more than several other counties in the state over individual and some other issues that happened in the election. And Ms. Watson and her team are following up on that. I think one of the differences here is that the scope of the problems sort of rose to a new level. Also, the inability on election day to seem to get a lot of those things under control. As many of the board members stated last week in the hearing, again, I think the goal is to identify issues, identify solutions, and work together so that in November we don't see these problems. And I think the thought in the Secretary of State's office is that the scale is so big and the stage is so big for Fulton County with so many people at stake, we want to make sure we can work with them and the board can come to a resolution with them that will, we have enough time to get ready. I mean, we're 60 days out now, so we want to get a resolution done as quickly as possible. So I just want to remind the board of the situation that Fulton County and the rest of the state was in while they conducted this election, and sort of identify that it's not a gotcha for Fulton County, but it is something that we feel needs immediate attention and addressing. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, I ask unanimous consent that the record from the past hearing be included in today's record.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, so ordered.
Mr. Secretary, this is Matt Master, and I move that the record from the previous hearing be included, ask unanimous consent to the record from the last hearing being included in this hearing.
Any objections? Hearing none, so ordered.
Okay, I'm ready to present. Again, this was SCB 2020-27 Fulton County, and this is mainly dealing with issues that were presented on election day. The first category of complaints involved polls opening late, and we identified 12 locations that opened late: Adams Park Library, Camp Truett Senior Center, Clifton Church, Jackson Warren T School, Lindsay Street Baptist, Morris Brandon, Park Tavern, Pittman Park, Southwest Arts Center, the Fairmont Wills Park Recreation Center, and Woodland Elementary School. 2 polls received the wrong equipment. They were swapped. One received the other and had to be delivered, which created an issue with them opening late. One of the complainants stated they showed up to vote at 6:45. At 7, they were still not ready. We were told at 7:30 that they were waiting on supplies. The polls did not open until 7:50. Then it took another 40 minutes for the voting to begin. We had many complaints from voters that their polling locations were changed. Voters at the incorrect polling location due to the poll location changes, and reports that they received no notice of the change. There were 45 polling locations that were changed, 8 due to renovations, 1 was closed, and 32 due to COVID-19 closures or concerns, and 4, the reason was unknown, and this was according to Fulton County. Many of the voters received a notice in the mail that was dated May the 22nd, 2020, but was not received until after the election on June 9th, 2020. This created confusion and delays at the polls, with voters showing up at the incorrect location and not being able to find where they were supposed to go. There was many complaints due to the long lines. Overwhelmingly, the biggest complaint was the long lines and the slow rate that the line was progressing. Reported up to wait times of 6 hours. Some of the issues that resulted in the lines were due to some of the polling locations having to be relocated, or changes in the polling locations. It created some locations that had many voters that were assigned to that location with not enough resources to process in a timely manner. For example, Park Tavern, that had approximately 16,000 voters assigned to the location on election day. Poll worker lack of training led to delay in setting up, operation of, and troubleshooting basic issues with the equipment. The wrong equipment and/or supplies not available created delays in waiting for equipment and supplies to be delivered. The inability of the poll managers and the poll workers to contact the elections office on election day. Poll managers expressed difficulty in reaching the elections office to report issues, requesting assistance, and verifying voter information. The delay in technical support, an example was Christian City requested a technician at 7:30 a.m. and did not arrive until 3:30 p.m. Complainants report the reason for the long lines were not enough poll workers not properly trained, and polls opening late. 49% of the poll managers expressed that they did not feel that they were adequately trained in operating the voting machines. 35% of the poll managers did not believe they had adequate staff on election day. The ADA issues that were reported, we have two complaints on the second Ponce de Leon Baptist Church precinct. There was no headsets, the ATI available at the poll site for a voter who experiences blindness to cast a private ballot. Also at Peachtree Hill Recreation Center polling site, a voter who experienced blindness could not independently verify information and party affiliation on the tablet upon arrival. There was no headset, the ATI, or controller available on site upon arriving. He chose to stay and wait until they could get that equipment there on site. Once it was on site, the poll workers had difficulty in setting it up and operating it. It took over 4 hours for him to be able to cast his vote, but he stayed and made sure that that was done. Multiple poll locations without the required signs posted. This is also found to be the case in the August election when the investigators were out doing their poll monitoring. Some of the signs that were not posted: the card of instruction, the notice of penalties, the voting rights poster, voting instructions, and the notice of the elderly. There were no oaths signed by the poll workers at the Messiah Precinct and Pittman Park. There was no seal on the scanner at one location, and no poll worker badges at Pittman Park. St. James Methodist Church Precinct advised two voters they did not have an extended hours paper ballot with the PPP available for them to vote. So those two voters cast ballots without the PPP on the ballot. We identified training as an issue, a lack of training. The poll managers that we talked to, we asked them what their experience in working at the polls were. We found that overall that they were not new to being poll manager, but they were new to this equipment. Most poll workers had little, if any, training on the actual machines themselves. The online training that Fulton County offered did not properly prepare the election staff to conduct the election. They did not know how to set the equipment up. Some reports were that they were having problems turning the machine on. They didn't know to hold the button down for a few seconds to power on the equipment. They didn't know how to deal with the issues such as paper jams and error messages. They had great difficulty in reaching anyone at Fulton County to get assistance when they had issues at the poll location. Some precincts had techs and some did not. The poll workers expressed not having enough training in provisional ballots, emergency ballots, and extended hours procedures. Poll managers voiced complaints regarding instructions that were not clear, requested more hands-on training with smaller class sizes, and basic troubleshooting training on equipment for the poll workers, to include mock setup and closing. Training in all the new forms with checklists for each package at the end of the night to make sure everything is included in their packages. Equipment issues that were reported to us from the poll managers in our phone interviews and in their questionnaires. They expressed concerning the poll pads that they had false positives when scanning driver's license. The search looks for various match points, and it's up to the poll worker and the voter to verify the information is the voter, but we're still researching this to verify exactly what the issue is there. The poll pads failed to show the voter registration number, needed to be rebooted, would go offline, or failure to sync. If the voter access card was not inserted into the encoder all the way, it failed to seat properly, the card would not properly encode. This created a situation where the voters would go back and it would have to be encoded again, which again created a delay. The BMDs failed to power on. Again, a training issue on how to set up and power on. Display asking for a code, a training issue to identify what the codes are and how to deal with those displays. The need for the BMD to be reset, error signals, it stopped working, invalid activation code, again, addressed through training. And 8:30 to 9 p.m. BMD started to shut down, which I believe is a training of how to set up the power supply for the machines. The scanner, paper jams, repeated complaint. In our poll monitoring, it was, this came up more in Fulton County. There was a metal box that Fulton County had that seemed to have a paper jam. There was some internal ledge that the paper would catch on and would not drop fully into the box. Again, reported that UPS failed and they had to be rebooted and that they were too slow. Supplies and forms not provided on election day. There were no recap forms provided to the precincts. To resolve the issue, as the machines and paperwork were submitted to the warehouse, the recap forms were completed by other staff, with the managers being contacted later to come in and sign the forms. Some did not have the poll zero count sheet, the numbered list form, a provisional inner and outer envelopes. Not enough seals were provided when they would have to open up the ballot box in order to clear a jam, or they would have to take the seal off, and then you have to reseal it, so you're using more seals when you're having to do that throughout the day. Printer paper, power strips, missing cords for the poll pads, missing extension cord for the carrier box, and missing log-on passwords for the poll pads. 54% of the poll managers that we spoke to advised they did not have adequate supplies for election day. Our recommendations are that we're recommending that Fulton County Board of Election and Registration and Fulton County Director of Election, Richard Barron, be bound over to the Attorney General's office for the listed violations. If you would like for me to read all of the violations, I would be happy to do so.
Ask unanimous consent that the violations be included in the record. I think they are.
Any objections? So ordered.
That concludes my presentation.
Mr. Germany, before we get to Fulton County, would you like to speak? And they go after Fulton County. Okay. Fulton County, if you could speak at that podium there, that will we'll pick you up on the mic. And just give us your name and
Good morning. My name's Amanda Clark Palmer. I'm here on behalf of Fulton County. I was at the hearing last week, so it's nice to see some of you in person, and good morning to everybody else who's on the phone. Yet again, Fulton County finds itself in the crosshairs of this board for alleged violations that occurred during the June 9th election. As we said at last week's hearing, the June 9th election was unprecedented in just about every aspect, and the employees of the Fulton County Board of Elections exhibited heroic efforts to conduct a successful and inclusive election. These employees and the volunteers who assist during the election are people who strive every day to achieve the most efficient election process that is possible. Their efforts to maximize absentee voting, early voting, and election day voting reflect their belief, shared by all, that our country, state, and county depend on the voting electorate for our democratic system of government to thrive. Not a single board member, staff member, poll worker, or volunteer has ever shirked his or her responsibility, and they receive very little credit for their work. They do not deserve to be vilified, and yet that is how they feel right now, being the only county that has been called to account before this board for the June 9th election. No one who works for the board or the county registration and election office is perfect. No one is clairvoyant or able to predict natural disasters such as a pandemic, but they are absolutely above reproach when it comes to their dedication to their jobs. It's not possible to overstate the effect the coronavirus pandemic had on the elections in June and August, to say nothing of absentee ballots and early voting in the spring and summer months. You heard about that last week, and I'm not going to repeat my comments today. But you know that despite all the challenges Fulton County faced, the staff continued to do their work, handling over 140 absentee ballots for the June election, which was a gargantuan increase over the expected amount, and ultimately pulled off an election where 233,000 people voted. The state board did recognize Fulton County's efforts at the hearing last week, and yet found probable cause to bind the case over to the Attorney General because it seems that a violation is a violation, and that's all it takes to bind a case over. Respectfully, I say that is insulting because it seems only to apply to Fulton County. The issues that Fulton County experienced during the June 9th election were not unique to them. I heard some of the callers mention issues with other counties this morning. And we know that many other counties, including ones in our metropolitan area, as well as rural counties that are hours away, experience long lines, malfunctioning voting machines, and not enough poll workers, just to name a few. All issues caused by the pandemic. If a violation is a violation, why is it that not a single notice of violation has been issued to any other county in the state for the June 9th election? If a violation is a violation and nothing more must be shown, it would seem that notices of violation should have been issued to virtually all 159 counties in our state. Perhaps the Secretary of State receives more complaints about Fulton County, but Fulton County also has the largest number of voters. Fulton County is where the Secretary of State had its investigators going to various polling locations looking for any possible election law violations. Now, I'm not here to suggest that that's actually what this board should do. I don't think you should chastise Cobb County, Gwinnett County, DeKalb County, or Chatham County. I think you should praise each and every one of those counties for their dedication to this election. The Fulton County Election Board and the staff that worked tirelessly from March, really earlier than March, through today to improve voting procedures accept responsibility for the problems that occurred despite their best efforts. And we're prepared to address those violations that are contained in your notice of hearing. We also submitted a letter brief yesterday, which I believe was included in your materials, where we really gave a lot more specifics and responses to some of the allegations. And you know that we're not claiming there were no problems. We recognize there were. And we're not claiming that the election ran flawlessly. And we know there were problems with the machines and the signage and the lines. But we explained to you what the cause of those problems were. And I think more importantly, and what I really want to focus on, is the steps that Fulton County has taken to make changes and improvements and things that have been implemented to address those issues that arose in June. And so I want to highlight some of those for your consideration today. First, Fulton County has made arrangements to increase the number of advanced voting locations for the November election to 24. They didn't plan to have only, 5 to 8 early voting locations available for the June pandemic, but with the fears about the coronavirus, as well as the extremely late notice of the renovations to Grady High School, that was really ripped from their control. But they now have made arrangements that are in place to make sure they have 24 advanced voting locations for the November election. And as you know from our brief, in the June election, there were only 5 locations available at the beginning of the early voting period, and that number increased to 8 by the third week of advanced voting. Second, Fulton County has resumed in-person training. They were unable to conduct in-person training for a time period before the June 9th election, but that has been resumed and will be conducted frequently and at regular intervals before the November election. And in fact, there will be some poll workers, by virtue of having worked in the various election days coming up to November, who will have received multiple in-person training sessions before the November election. And previously, poll workers had to pass a 10-question examination at the end of the training in order to be certified as a poll worker. That has been changed, and they now have to pass a 20-question examination before they are certified. Third, Fulton County will have a technician present on site at every precinct on Election Day. These people will be available and trained to deal with any technical issues that arise with the equipment. There will also be 3 call centers available with approximately 100 operators to answer calls from both poll workers and voters with any concerns on Election Day. We will have, by virtue of having more locations available, we're going to have fewer voters per location, and that will improve the issue with lines and delays in voting. Fifth, the poll workers are going to have more experience with these new machines, and we fully expect to see fewer technical issues with people not remembering where to go to troubleshoot any problems with the machines. So we will no longer have, people who are novices at working these new voting machines. Sixth, with improved absentee ballot procedures, we expect that absentee voters will not be showing up at the polls, insisting on their right to vote, which ultimately causes a delay because the poll worker has to prepare an affidavit and follow some certain procedures in order to cancel that previously requested absentee ballot. And we want to thank and applaud the state for creating the online portal that we think is going to be able to greatly facilitate the absentee voting process. And since we talked about including the minutes from last week, I would ask you all to remember the other comments that we made about improvements in the absentee ballot process that we talked about last week. We can also address, if anybody has any questions about the specific alleged violations or any other questions that you have, we have some employees with us here. Rick Barron is here, as well as Nadine is here and Johnny Harris is here. They are employees of the Fulton County Board of Elections. Johnny can speak to training, and Nadine can speak to supply issues and equipment issues if anybody has any questions for them. So at the end of this matter, this board should vote to close and dismiss the matter rather than taking any other action. And to be fair and just, you should also thank the hard work of the Fulton County Elections Board and their staff, and they deserve far more than just a simple, we bind this over to the Attorney General's office based on probable cause. Thank you.
Do you have any further comments on your side that you'd like to make?
No, that's why we submitted the brief yesterday, because otherwise I think I'd be standing up here for probably 30 more minutes. But if any of the board members have questions, we do have the people I mentioned who are available to answer them or address them, or I could do that as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, do we have any complainants that are on the line? Okay. Bree, if you want to let us know the first person that would like to speak, they provide their name and then just explain the issue that they found. Thank you.
So the first complainant is Micah Escano.
Okay.
Yes, sir. You're able to speak now.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So again, I've submitted some comments in writing, and I'll highlight a few points from what I submitted before. But when I showed up to the polling place early for early voting, the line was fairly long, but a poll worker told me it was only about an hour wait, and I figured that must be correct because we're all trying to socially distance, space it out, let's make it longer. About an hour and a half later, they said it was going to be about another hour. And at the end of the day, it took close to 4 hours. I looked back at my watch and my schedule and realized it was about 3 hours, 45 minutes from the time I stood in line to the time I walked out the door. And that doesn't include parking or anything else or getting there, which is a good chunk of my day that I originally intended to take my lunch break, go vote, and get back to work. So I had to manage a lot with my boss to say, like, I'm so close to voting, then I'll get back to work. But for me, it's very frustrating to see some people leave the line. One gentleman had his wife pick him to a gas station to go to the bathroom and come back because he didn't know if there were facilities at the front of the line or if they were accessible due to the pandemic. There was no food or water offered until I probably got up near the front of the line. I don't know if that's common or part of the voting process. Because honestly, I've never had to be in the line long enough where I think about going to the bathroom, getting water, or needing a snack to stay awake. It was a very frustrating experience that, again, I think someone just mentioned that most of the problems were on election day. This was early voting. It was 4 hours in the middle of the day, early voting. And to see people in such miserable conditions and such confusion and not much communication from poll workers, no signage where we were in the back of the line to call anyone to ask for, what's going on, can we fix this? There was just no communication, no process. And even when we got inside, it wasn't even clear where you could vote. The machines, honestly, because there were multiple sides to the machines, well, we didn't know there was a backside. So consistently, I saw one of the backside of the machines not being used because who would go behind the machine to look to see if we could vote there? It wasn't intuitive, and it was just a very frustrating experience. Again, I've mentioned most of this already in my written comments, but I want to reiterate some of those things and just say, as kind of extra color commentary, that the machines may be new, but the demographic of poll workers tend to be more older people who, in my experience, are less technically savvy. And if that's your demographic for people working the polls, you need to have the process and technology targeting that demographic. I voted in August at the Atlanta Hawks Stadium to a much younger demographic who was very comfortable with the technology. And one of them flat out told me it really wasn't that hard. But that's because they're a younger generation who understands technology. And I personally work with dealing with process technology with a lot of older employees, and I have to build the process and technology around them at their level. And to me, that just makes common sense. And I don't know if it's a fault of a particular department or the vendor or whoever, but to me, that seems like a fundamental thing. You don't take the highest, most complicated piece of technology and give it to someone who can't turn on the iPad. And sorry I'm frustrated, but those are my comments, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Do we have another speaker? That's it?
Yeah, if anyone else would like to speak towards this case, please raise your hand right now or write in the comments box so we can give you a chance.
Okay. Well, we've heard from Fulton County, we've heard from a complaint. I don't believe there's any other comments. Board members, we have before you SEB case 2020-027. What comments would you like to make, or what questions do you have? Or do you want to make a motion? What is the disposition of the board? Ms. Lee?
Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Worley?
I'm sorry, Ms. Lee can go ahead.
Oh, no, it's, Mr. Worley, you go ahead. I think you spoke up first. Go ahead.
All right. I had before making any comments, I had a number of questions for Ms. Palmer.
Okay.
Ms. Palmer, thank you for the letter brief. That was very helpful and cleared up a lot of issues in my mind, but I did want to follow up on a few of the points that you made. First, on page 4 of your letter brief, you have an item 4 that begins the complications with absentee ballots. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, I had a question regarding a statement you make there. You say, though the number of absentee voters reduced the number of election day voters, this was more than offset by the number of election day voters who came to the poll after having registered as an absentee voter, which required the preparation of an affidavit, et cetera. Are you really saying that, I mean, is that really mathematically possible? Because it seems to me what you're saying is that most of the people who requested an absentee ballot didn't get one. And I'm sure that, I certainly hope that that's not the case.
Yes, Mr. Worley, what I meant, not that there was a 1-for-1 in terms of the number of voters, but that the people who had to come to the polls because they had some kind of issue with their absentee ballot would increase the amount of time it took for them to vote. You know, it would take longer for somebody like that to vote than it would for somebody who was just coming to vote without having requested an absentee ballot. And so that extra time, you know, would delay the line and impact the, you know, time and speed with which that particular precinct may be able to process their voters. That's what I meant.
Okay, thank you. I had some other specific comments about, or specific questions about some of your responses that you itemized later in the letter brief. Item 2, that about the Fulton County Board of Elections failed to provide at least one electronic ballot marker.
And what page was that, Mr. Worley?
See that?
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry?
On page 5.
Okay.
Yes, on page 5. You indicate that for item number 2, the precinct workers were instructed over the phone about where to find the unit, and that problem was resolved.
On election day, it was part of the online training that they received where all the supplies were located on the carrier. And then on election day, there was one precinct that called and said, you know, we can't find the headset. And they were instructed over the phone where to find it.
Okay. And then on your response to item 3 about the necessary election day forms, in your response, the second paragraph, you say the 0 county sheet was not provided in the Secretary of State's supply store, and Fulton County was told not to bother using it. Who told Fulton County that?
Could you bear with me 1 second and I'll get the answer to that for you? I'm going to ask Ms. Williams, who's here in the room. So, Mr. Worley, my understanding is that Fulton County was told by their chief, Mr. Evans, not to use it, and Mr. Barron has confirmed that other counties received the same instructions with regard to that particular form.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, there's an allegation that Fulton County, and this is your response 4 on page 6, or your response to item 4 on page 6. The Fulton County Board of Elections violated OCGA section 21-2-99, instruction of poll officer and workers in election procedures. Could you just elaborate on why it is that you think that Fulton County is not responsible for that kind of violation?
Sure. So, as I noted in our response, they naturally had limitations with the pandemic on how to provide training that were kind of twofold. And these were things that were outside their control. Number one, they actually had trained over 1,000 people in person before, the pandemic hit. So then the pandemic comes, and now they have a large number of people who had previously been trained call them and communicate to them and say, I'm not going to be a poll worker anymore, right? I don't feel comfortable doing it. So they lost all of those people that they had previously provided in-person training to. Secondly, given the conditions of the pandemic, and I would again ask everybody to kind of remember what life was like in March and April. I think that was really before we were wearing masks. It was before things had started to open back up in our state, and people were really reluctant to leave their homes, which necessitated that Fulton County had to develop an online training within a very short time period. And they did that. It was, Mr. Harris, am I correct? Was it a 3-hour online training? Closer to a 4-hour online training session that they developed. It was offered multiple times, and then they also did webinars with their poll workers right before the June 9th election, where the poll workers could call up and ask questions, and it was more of an interactive thing. Look, I recognize that virtual training, especially when you're dealing with new equipment, is not as good as in-person training. But given the limitations they were facing at that point in time, I don't know what they could have done differently. We're dealing with new machines. I want to echo something that the complainant said when he called. It does turn out that most poll workers tend to be older. I think there are plenty of people of all ages who are comfortable with technology, but I think it's fair to say as a general rule, maybe people who are older are less comfortable with technology, and I'm certain that has some kind of impact when we're talking about this particular issue. But they had a multi-hour training session. They gave a test at the end of it to certify that people were paying attention and retaining the important information. I don't know how you can turn at Fulton County and say, well, if there were problems at the polls that day, with people who didn't retain the information, maybe because they didn't have that hands-on experience or for whatever reason, I don't see how Fulton County should be held responsible for that violation given all the other circumstances that were at play.
Thank you. Those are all the questions that I have. I'll have some motions to make at the appropriate time.
Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Palmer. This is on
Ms. Lee?
Ms. Palmer?
Yes.
I just wanted to ask if you can clarify. I think you did, you clearly laid out all the different steps that Fulton County took in training the poll workers. And in abstract, it sounds good in the sense that there's a test and materials were put together, multiple opportunities to ask questions, as interactive as virtual can get. But given that it still fell short and in your words, not as good as in-person training. Can you elaborate on what has been done other than going through the steps in terms of substance and achieving that end result, which is getting trained poll workers sufficiently trained, regardless of the method of training, whether it's in person or online, adequately and sufficiently trained and ready for this and future elections? I don't think that the age gap should be, I think it's a consideration in terms of if someone isn't as familiar with technology, but your training sessions, I'm assuming, should address all the different levels of familiarity with technology, I'm assuming. So could you elaborate on how your county, Fulton County, is going to close that gap that were clearly missed in this last election in terms of training? Even though I understand the steps were taken, I'm looking for substance. Thank you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So Fulton County, as I said before, has resumed the in-person training. It's offered multiple times at different locations throughout the county so that there are plenty of opportunities to be trained. I was just observing on Tuesday, I believe, down at the building that the Fulton County Board of Elections offices are in. They were conducting an in-person training. It was a small class size so that people could ask questions. They had the equipment in front of them to use it and interact with it. And then, as I said before, we're going to have poll workers who, because they have now worked multiple elections, have more familiarity with the equipment. So they're going to have that kind of institutional knowledge that they bring with them. And then also, as I said before, we're going to have technicians at every site in the November election who will be on site and dedicated to that precinct, to be there to troubleshoot any problems there may be. And we've expanded the number of people who were at the call center for the June 9th election was also impacted by COVID. It was a lower number than Fulton County had wanted to and anticipated having. And so they will have 100 people in the call centers for the November election. So those few steps that I've just outlined will address that issue that you raised.
Thank you.
I understand that we now have 4 complainants, and if we have the first one, additional complainants. But if we have the first one?
So first we have Sigdom Octum. You're unmuted, you can speak now.
Thank you. I hope you all can hear me.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Chidem Octum, and I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts here. I echo the comments that have been shared by others. I also was in the 4.5-hour line to vote, encountered the kinds of issues that are being discussed. But beyond that, I also observed, because I did do the subsequent vote. I went, did the subsequent voting opportunity that we had, and did that in a different location. And so here's something that I think is worth considering. Given the fact that the current process requires voters to go through 3 separate lines to register, to check in and get the key card, to then vote, and then to turn the key card in, if everything goes smoothly, we're still talking 6 to 7 minutes. And that was a concern as I think about anticipating the kind of volume we're going to talk about for the fall, for the November elections. So I wanted to just be clear here that as you all are thinking about and very thoughtfully addressing the changes that are needed to ensure everything goes as smoothly as possible, the fact that the process itself, even under the best circumstances, does require a certain amount of time, I hope that's being taken into account so that that's part of the assumption in looking at how many locations would be sufficient, how many poll workers, et cetera, because that was a big concern that I noted when I kind of took a step back from the in the moment and looked at the overall process. And just one thing to reflect on as well as I'm listening to the conversation here, there is one thing that is a little disconcerting, which is I recognize that there was a crisis afoot and that impacts things. But most organizations have, scenario planning and crisis planning scenarios that they walk through in advance so that when unexpected issues come up, there's at least some sort of sense of a plan or what could be done. I haven't heard any of that. So to the extent that that's something worth considering for the future, I wanted to bring that up because most organizations these days, both nonprofit and for-profit, are really dialing up their crisis planning and their scenarios because things happen that are unexpected. So I just wanted to share my thoughts on these, and again, went through the painful process that everybody else has spoken about, and beyond the observations I had, which they have already shared, so I don't want to repeat it. The fundamental underlying process itself, I think, calls for looking more closely at the number of resources that are needed to ensure everything goes smoothly. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next.
Next, we have Maceo Fletcher. You may now speak. Maceo Fletcher, you're unmuted. You may now speak. All right, next we'll have Mark Wingate. You're self-muted right now.
He's a board member. He's a board member also.
Mr. Wingate, you're muted right now. You're self-muted. Okay. Maceo Fletcher.
Hello?
Yes, we can
Can
hear
you
you.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Is that it?
Oh, can you hear me?
You're on.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, this is on. I can hear you, but I don't hear anyone else.
We can hear you.
Okay, my name is Maceo Fletcher. My name is Maceo Fletcher. I'm out of Fulton County. First of all, I'd like to say hello to David Worley. We've worked on campaigns in the past together. But my question is, why is it that there's always problems centered around minority areas, whether it's a polls being moved or polls being closed or merging of polls or different aspects, but it's always something concerning a mass of people that can vote, and they can't vote because there's a problem. It can be a technical difficulty because these machines are not there. Jesse Jackson came in and not MPU not too long ago, and there was machines there. So can you address that? Why there's some sort of voter suppression in the minority area? I can't hear anything. Can you fix the audio, please?
What's that?
Yes, we can hear you, but it's a little sketchy. Can you come a little closer?
That's voter suppression right there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher.
Next one. Is there any others? Okay.
Hello, this is Mr. Worley. Did Ms. Palmer want to respond to that?
She shook her head no, she declines. I think we're good. Yeah, I understand. Same issue. Mr. Harvey, there was a few questions raised. Could you address some of the questions that were, or comments that were brought up?
I hope you're not talking about the last call. I couldn't understand.
No.
Okay, but generally,
The general
questions and comments have met. And I understand that there may have been some difficulty hearing me when I made my comments at the beginning of the meeting, so I'll reiterate them again. I think for the people on the webcast. Again, I wanted to just reiterate what I said in the previous meeting about the situation that Fulton County and the rest of the state were under in the June election. All those comments made then, I would repeat them, but save everybody the time to actually go through that. Some of the questions, and I responded also at the beginning of the meeting to the issue or the idea that Fulton County was somehow being unfairly singled out or criticized. I don't think that's an accurate characterization. The numbers of complaints we got and the sort of the depths and the scope of the complaints indicated to me that there were some pretty fundamental issues that we wanted to make sure we got resolved before November. Yes, there are other counties that have problems, and frankly, there are a number of other counties that have investigations that are being undertaken by Ms. Watson and her team, and they will eventually get their time going. The fact was that when Fulton County had some real obstacles and some real roadblocks, they had a much harder time recovering as the day went on, and they weren't able to get ahead of them. Other counties had issues delivering equipment, and they had lines. They seemed to be able to recover a little better. And so, as I mentioned, I think last week, the day after the election, I walked down to the Fulton County office and sat in Mr. Barron's office, and we spoke for about 2 hours, and we talked about, hey, what can we do to make this better? What can we do so this doesn't happen again? What resources do you need? What can we do to help you guys? Because as everybody knows, it's the county that actually runs the elections. We certainly support, we certainly create an environment, hopefully where they can be successful. But really, we don't open any polling places. We don't deploy equipment. We don't select poll workers, train them, and things like that. So over the series of the last couple of weeks since June, or a couple of months, I guess now, I've had regular communication with Mr. Barron, members of his team. I think we've made a lot of progress. But again, to why we're here today is because I think it was important that Fulton County understood the gravity of what was going on, and if we saw the similar kinds of systematic problems that we saw in June, regardless of what the COVID situation was, we thought there were going to be problems. I've said before that if somebody had told me in January, and we were at our conference, our state conference in, I think, December of last year, if somebody had told me that deploying a new voting system would be the 5th or 6th hardest thing we would have to do in elections this year, I think I would have, quit and done something else. The fact is, all these issues that came up that Fulton County dealt with were problems that every county dealt with. Some really rose to the challenge. Many were, had challenges and had issues but they were able to deal with them. So my thought in this is that we want to continue to build a partnership with Fulton County. We want to solve problems. We want to leverage our office's ability to provide solutions. So that when the voters go to vote in November, or when they actually start in mid-October, early mid-October, they have a great experience, and that Fulton County is able to provide the level of service for the counties that I absolutely know they intend to do. That I know Mr. Barron, I know Mr. Jones, I know Chairperson Cooney are interested in providing for the citizens of Fulton County. If I could just mention a few things that we've done in partnership with Fulton County that I think are moving towards that end. Like I said, I probably speak with Mr. Barron once a week. We have large county conference calls with the 10 largest counties in the state so that we can address their specific needs and specific issues. We've talked about basically exchanging liaisons on election night so that Fulton County has somebody in our command center and we have somebody in their command center so that we can have immediate communication back and forth. We don't have to miss phone calls and wonder what's going on. One of the things that we knew was a problem was the absentee portal, and we launched that last week and has been really a tremendous success. I think everybody recognizes that. I know when we have some of our regular callers to the state election board, when they're praising our efforts with the election absentee ballot portal, you know that it's a success. And we've seen over 50,000. We're getting about 10,000 absentee ballot applications a day on that portal. And the counties are responding incredibly well. And we've sent over 4,000 applications to Fulton County for people that want to become poll workers. Matter of fact, I had a conversation with Mr. Barron, I think it was last week or the week before, about what they're going to do with all these folks and how they, they can't even absorb all that. So they're going to build a reserve list, and they're going to have people in backups, and they're going to maybe offer some of those people to be Dominion technicians. So the fact that I think the Secretary of State's office and Fulton County recognized immediately that there were some problems and that we've worked together. I told Mr. Barron that I knew that issues would come up in the press and public things would be said, but it was my commitment that we work together in a partnership so that the citizens of Fulton County, the citizens of Georgia are best served, and they're the ones that get to vote. And I think we've been largely successful to that end. And I think this hearing is kind of a continuation of that process. And as was mentioned by several board members last week, the real goal is to have a successful election in November and to identify these things. It was encouraging to hear some of the responses that were presented. Fulton County's already done to improve it. So I think we're on the right track. I want to continue that partnership. We've got about 2 months to go. And I think I know everybody at the Secretary of State's office, and I believe everybody at Fulton County wants to make this the best election that Georgia's ever seen.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Does anyone else wish to speak? Board members, it's put it back in your hands. This is before you. I don't know if you have any comments or if you want to make a motion.
Mr. Secretary, this is David Worley. I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Mr. Worley, it's back to the board. Do you have any comments, or does the board wish to make any motions at the present time? Ms. Lee, Mr. Mashburn. Mr. Mashburn has the floor is yours.
First, I think Fulton County's attorneys have made an excellent presentation today. Fulton County's been well represented, and their attorneys have done an excellent job and have presented their case very well. One thing that I did appreciate was when there was something that needed to be admitted, they just admitted it rather than fight every single last point to the bitter end. So I think that helped a lot. One thing I would like to address, though, specifically is I might have misread the letter last night, but I read that Fulton County was being vilified, and I heard today during the excellent presentation by the attorney that they felt vilified. And so I wanted to kind of address that, and that I've been down at Fulton County as a member of the public, observing, credentialed poll watcher, credentialed tabulation person for over 30 years, and I've never been treated with anything other than respect and kindness and friendliness and helpfulness. And so I don't believe this board or the Secretary of State, and certainly not I, have any intention to vilify anyone at Fulton. I've been very respectful of, or very appreciative of their kindness that they've shown me through these years, and their friendliness, and count them as very kind and diligent public servants, and I appreciate all the work that we have, that they do for the citizens of Fulton County and Georgia. And so I want to be very clear that the takeaway from at least my comments, and I think I hear the board saying the same thing, was not that the county workers go home and say that we've been picked on or vilified, and that was their takeaway. So I just wanted to be real clear about that. Being the junior member of the board, Mr. Worley, my colleague, indicated that he was prepared to make a motion, and so I would yield the floor back with the Secretary's permission to Mr. Worley for his motion.
Mr. Worley, the floor is yours.
Before I make the motion, or maybe a series of motions, I just wanted to make some general comments. First of all, the problems that were experienced on the primary election day were not unique to Fulton County. I think we need to recognize that and address that, and I think I hope, and I do think the Elections Division is addressing that problem with other counties, and there, I expect, will be complaints filed against other counties as a result. But when 20 counties in the state have to hold their polls open beyond 7 p.m., clearly that's a problem, and it's obviously not isolated to Fulton County. I also think that some of the problems that were brought to our consideration today were directly related to the pandemic, to poll workers not showing up, to long-standing precincts deciding that they no longer wanted to be precincts, or polling locations, that is. I don't really know, I mean, I think that Fulton County handled that as best as they possibly could. That being said, I also think that we need to consider the complaints that we have today in light of our past practice in similar situations. And it's generally been our practice, and I think it should remain our practice, that we take into account how responsive the county has been, how willing the county has been to correct problems that we're dealing with. And I do think that Fulton County has been very forthright, very cooperative in dealing with these problems. They certainly are taking these matters very seriously and working very hard to make sure that these issues don't come up again in November. So with all that being said, there are a couple of the items that have been complained about that I think ought to be dismissed. And the first is the failure of the Board of Elections to provide at least one electronic ballot marker that meets the requirements to be accessible to individuals with disabilities. It seems clear from the evidence that Fulton County actually did provide that equipment. The poll personnel were not able to find it immediately, but they did eventually find it. But that Fulton County did provide that. So I would make a motion that that alleged violation be dismissed.
Do we have a second?
Mr. Worley, I'd like to just add a thought to that. For that one voter, I think, let me rephrase, I think this is a training issue. And that's something that Fulton County has spoke about earlier, but it's also something that is in the control of the Fulton County, I guess, poll workers or their domain, in the sense that, you know, for that one voter who comes in and needs, and it takes a while, or in some cases, if they can't find it, that one voter, it affects them 100%. So I would not support the motion to dismiss that, because it's something they could address in voting. And I would echo everything you say, and Mr. Mashburn saying, you haven't been in elections on the operations side. I do appreciate the nuances and the challenges that come with every day under normal circumstances, let alone under a pandemic. I mean, it's hugely challenging to say, and that's an understatement. So I do appreciate what these counties, the challenges they may go through, and it's not lightly that I say that, because I know it's challenging. But we're in the business of ensuring the right to vote, not a privilege to vote, but the right to vote is carried out to the best that we can. And I think in that case, I would not want to dismiss, in the case of I think you're talking about number 2, to dismiss that, but leave that back in so that the Fulton County boards can address in terms of the training. So I would not support that motion.
Do we have a second? Motion fails due to lack of second. Do you have any other motions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warren.
Yes, I had some other motions. The next motion, and this is item 3 in the letter brief of Fulton County. The allegation is that the Board of Elections failed to provide necessary election day forms. And it seems that the only form that is at issue is the 0 county sheet, which was not provided in the Secretary of State's supply store. So I would move to dismiss that allegation.
Well, thanks. They mentioned the Secretary of State's office, so they could address, did the Secretary of State's office provide that form? Ms. Watson or Mr. Harvey?
Yes, there was additional forms. The recap form was not provided to any of the precincts, and the numbered list form and the inner and outer provisional envelopes were not provided. They were provided, but they ran out and they had to be resupplied at some locations. Some locations didn't receive the necessary supply.
Was that a Fulton issue?
I'm sorry.
Was that a Fulton issue or was that a Secretary of State issue?
That was Fulton County did not provide those.
Correct.
The recap forms were at the warehouse.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Hearing none, motion fails. Do we have any other motions?
Right. Yes, I have 2 other motions that I would make. 3 other motions. Let me start with the items that are indicated as items 5 through 17 in the letter brief that Fulton County submitted. Those do appear to be the types of minor violations for which we normally issue a letter of instruction to Fulton County or to any county. And so I would make a motion that we send a letter of instruction to Fulton County on the items listed as numbers 5 through 17 in their letter brief.
Do we have a second?
I would respectfully modify that motion to items 6 through 17.
I'd accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, so we have that before us, items 6 through 17. Any further comment on that? All those in favor of that motion?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Okay.
And then I would have 2 further motions, Mr. Secretary.
Okay.
The first would be relating to item 4 in the letter brief, which is an allegation that Fulton County violated the code by its training of voters, failure to properly train the voters. I'm sorry, the election of workers. It seems to me that under all the circumstances here of the pandemic that everyone is dealing with, that Fulton County did the best that they reasonably could be expected to do under the circumstances of the pandemic. And so I would move to dismiss that allegation.
Do we have is that a motion? So do we have a second?
Yes, that's a motion.
Okay. Do we have a second? Do we have a second? Motion dies due to lack of second.
Okay.
Do we have another?
And then I'd have one.
Go ahead, Mr. Worley.
I'd have one final motion. And this relates to the first item in the letter brief about polling places not being open. Apparently there were 12 polling places that were not open on time. And again, I think we have to consider this in light of the pandemic and the large number of precincts that were where the church or the school decided, often at the very last minute, that they would not be a polling place. Again, I don't think that that is something that is within Fulton County's control to such an extent that we should hold them responsible for a violation of the code because the election precinct opened somewhat late. I just don't think that that's fair or reasonable. I also don't think we should be in the business of referring to the Attorney General every time a polling precinct opens somewhat late. There are remedies for that. When those precincts are open late, they are held open late in the evening. And they should be, obviously. And I don't want to encourage any county to not work extremely diligently to open the polls on time. That has to be done for the adequate operation of our election system. But given that there were 12 locations out of well over 150 locations that Fulton County operates, and that those seem to be, based on the evidence, related to these, in many cases, unforeseeable precinct changes, polling location changes, I don't think it's appropriate to bind that over to the Attorney General's office. I would make them so at the very least, or at the very most, I think we should send a letter of instruction because of that. But I do think it's more appropriate under the circumstances that that allegation be dismissed, and I would make a motion that it be dismissed.
Do we have a motion to, a second to dismiss? Hearing none, motion fails.
Then, Mr. Secretary, I'd make one final motion to send a letter of instruction to Fulton County regarding the 12 polling locations that were not available at 7 a.m.
Do we have a second? Hearing none, that motion fails also. Do we have any other board members that would you like to speak or present a motion?
I just want to add to, or comment to Mr. Worley's thoughts on the polling. This is on me for the record. Thoughts on the polling places open late. We have in the past, if I recall correctly, sent to the AG's office polling places that don't open on time for various reasons. And I think you're right, Mr. Worley, to the fact that, you know, this is caused a lot of by the pandemic. But the fact that it opened late, we have bound it over for part of the reason being for that voter who comes at 7, asks for time off or to come in late to work to vote and has to leave because the polling place didn't open. You know, again, for that one voter, that is 100% denial of that person's right or impairment of that person's right to vote, even if we were to extend it to 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. So it is very much important that when we say we're going to open on time at 7 o'clock, that we do in fact open on time. So, for that reason, I don't take it lightly that when we're supposed to open at 7, that we don't, for the simple fact that we compensate it late at night, to me, is not parallel compensation. So for that reason, I move to bind the rest of the items to the AG's office, not in the spirit of prosecution, but hopefully in the spirit of finding having more time to work it out with Fulton County to find a viable resolution to these problems so that we can mitigate them in the future, and perhaps as a model for other counties who may encounter similar problems in the future as well. I think there's a lot of hope for that, and I think we can achieve that. So I'm not asking to bind over so that we can prosecute or vilify Fulton County in any way, but perhaps to give it more time so that we can, the Secretary of State's office and the AG's office and Fulton County can collaboratively work out a more meaningful path going forward on those items. That's my motion.
Second.
We have a motion, we have second. Any further comment?
I'd like to just make a couple of comments. This is Mr. Worley for the record. First of all, I appreciate the comments that Ms. Lee has made, and I certainly agree that every voter who is inconvenienced by the polls being open late is a serious problem. But I'm afraid that we've adopted a standard here, which means that every time now a poll is held open late because it opened late in the morning, that we are going to have to refer that to the Attorney General for investigation. And that happened in 20 counties on the primary day. So I fully expect that we will get reports from the Secretary of State on each of those counties, and that we will refer those over to the Attorney General for investigation, each one of those. That's the standard that we seem about to set, and I don't think that's the right standard to set. Beyond that, I just want to make one final comment. Last week, for the issue of absentee ballot applications, I took the position that those needed to be referred over to the Attorney General because that was a very serious situation, denying persons their right to vote. That situation, to me, was a much more systemic problem that took place over a long period of time, that was not related or as directly to the pandemic as the election day issues that we've been dealing with today. So just by way of explanation, I just wanted to explain that that's the distinction that I made in the position that I took last week and this week. Thank you. That's all.
Mr. Mashburn, you wish to speak?
This is a part of the discussion. Before we vote on the motion, I'm not voting on the motion on this basis that we have agreed that every single late opening precinct is a referral. I'd see a big difference between one precinct opening late because, say, example, the fire department failed to bring the keys on time at 6:30 in the morning, and so they fixed the problem and they did open late. But 12 is a different matter than 1. So I'm going to vote for the motion, but I don't believe that my vote is setting a standard that every single late opening precinct is a cause for referral.
Thank you. Any other additional comments?
And this is on Lee, and those are my thoughts as well. I do not think this is the one-size-fits-all blanket standard that any time, for any reason whatsoever, as with every case that's come before us, there are lots of facts, and it's fact-based. So, to the extent that it is completely out of the county's control, and not something they can address through training or better practices, then I think that deserves a different look than something that's otherwise under their control and could be improved with training. So my motion also does not mean it's a blanket universal, anytime you're late, you'll be bound over to the AG's office for prosecution.
Hearing no further comment, all those in favor of the motion as presented signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed?
No?
Motion carries. Okay, there's some other items on this list. What is the will of the board? I think there's still some on there. We haven't gotten them all, have we?
I think Ms. Lee's motion was to refer everything other than the items that
Okay.
we had voted on a letter of instruction on to the Attorney General.
Great.
Just, I agree, that was my understanding.
Okay, great. So that concludes our work then. Do we have any additional comments from any of the board members?
Before we adjourn, I would like to make one additional comment, and that is, I would like to commend the Secretary of State and the staff for the online portal. I used it myself, and the whole process from beginning to end took less than a minute. And that included a confirming email that I received, as well as an online message that confirmed it. So I just think that was a terrific rollout. It worked perfectly, and the whole process took me less than a minute from beginning to end. So I just want to take a minute to commend the Secretary and the Secretary's excellent staff for getting this up and running, and just did a great job with it.
Thank you. Any other members? Mr. Worley, Ms. Lee?
This is Mr. Worley. I've heard good reports about the portal as well, and I commend the Secretary for getting that rollout done. Of course, the proof is in the pudding, and Mr. Mashburn will be very happy when his ballot comes shortly after September 19th, I guess. And I just hope everything continues well with the operations of that portal. Does the election division have any figures yet as to how many people have used the portal so far?
I believe we're at 80,000 right now. Mr. Harvey shaking his head, yes. And I think we're adding 15 to 20,000 a day. So it's been very well received.
Well, that's excellent news. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, now would be
This is Anli. I've also used the portal, and it's great. I had a great experience with it. Thank you.
Now would be the appropriate time for a motion for adjournment, if anyone would like to so move.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary and board members.
I know, we always on hot mic.